Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. I want to start off by asking how you are, given that you've had a very stressful afternoon getting that last minute thing done.
Yeah, I'm good. It's the nature of the job, isn't it, really? You got the golden handcuffs at all times, really. You can never really relax. You never know what's going to come in the door.
Well, but that's part of the joy too,
yeah.
Right? I mean, you can get stuff to your clients quickly and make them happy. And that's, what we all strive for, right?
I mean, I think my brain really appreciates that. I get so bored if I'm just doing the same thing day in, day out. So I like to have a lot of plates spinning and unexpected things happening. I sort of feed off that energy a little bit.
Yeah, I think you and I are very similar that
way.
Yeah, I totally get it. Hence this podcast.
Right.
I mean, of the many things that we do in a day, right?
Yeah, we'll go
Which
off
I'm sure
into
you're
some
familiar
really
with.
weird directions that, veer off subject. And, we know who knows what's going to happen with the discussion. But, it'll be interesting, hopefully.
That's the joy. That's what we're here for. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. This is how I usually start just about any conversation I have with someone on this podcast. If you could tell me a story about an early memory of how sound moved you.
Yeah, I have two. And one's cool and sort of cool, and one's very, very uncool. I'll start with the uncool one.
Okay.
I have one of my earliest memories is playing with Meccano. Do you have Meccano over here? It's like Lego, but it's made out of it's like metal, and you can actually have like screws and things like that. It's meant to like help with engineering and things like that. But I remember playing with that as a kid and listening on repeat. I had it on tape to that Starship song, "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now." Do you remember that song?
I do.
For some reason at like 4 or 5, I was like obsessed with that song. And I was just literally playing with my Meccano, and the tape would finish and I'd rewind it back to the beginning and just over and it. And I remember my mum just like tearing her hair out listening to this bloody thing, over and over again. So that's such a vivid memory in my, being in my room as a kid in London and doing that. And I think probably the thing that, the first memory of sound that moved me was hearing Imagine for the first time. And, obviously it's a great song, it's an iconic song, but as a kid I'd never been exposed to creativity like that before. It was all very mainstream and, just mainstream, anything that you would see on the TV, in the 80s. And I don't know where and when I heard it, how I heard it, but I just heard this thing and I was just transfixed by it. And it was just, for a little, kid, hearing something kind of slow and moving like that was sort of a revelation for me. And it's always sort of held a special place for me. And I think, though, songs like that, when you first hear something that kind of stops you in your tracks, are very meaningful.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I'm curious then how you went from that music experience to playing the drums.
Well, I actually started with piano and we were talking about my bird brain. I couldn't, like the music theory side of it was too much of a barrier. I just wanted to get in and just make a racket, make a noise. And obviously with the drums, it's very visceral,
Oh, yeah.
And that transition to guitar. So really it's drums and guitar, but drums were the first instrument I properly actually stuck at, because you can pretty much get something satisfying, 5 minutes in, on the drums, even if it's like, really
enough.
Rudimentary.
Yeah. You can pound on it
Yeah,
enough.
exactly. Yeah, it sounds loud, therefore good, right?
Must be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the drums really where it gave you that instant, like, feedback.
Sure. Yeah. And then from there to audio engineering, like what was the transition from that?
Well, I mean, I was trying to be sort of sensible because
Oh, you needed a job.
Right. Well, that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Well,
Okay.
before then, while I was still in school, I was like, I was in bands and I was like, oh, I want to be in bands and just do that. But, the likelihood of that, as we all know, is extremely low. And, these days you don't make any money, even if you're in a successful band. But I didn't know that was coming. But I thought, well, I want to be in music one way or another. And, I like the technical side of things. So I just experiment. I was the guy in the band who tried to record everyone. And so this was like really early in computer recording. And I just had this sort of sound card that had like one input and would do everything really painstakingly, slowly and poorly. But I was learning. This is when Logic was still on a PC, that was, quite a long time ago. And
I remember those days.
Yeah. It was like
I remember recording back to back on cassette tapes.
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, really, really early in my life, I remember having two tape players and recording one, myself saying something, and then playing it back while I was, and really rudimentary.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I figured I'd kind of stay in that universe by doing studio stuff, and I tried a few other things when I went to college and just didn't like it and just was like, well, I really want to do this, so let's, maybe I could try that. And eventually I got into a university that was quite hard to get into at the time. University of Westminster had what's called a commercial music course, and it was pretty highly regarded, and I was lucky enough to get in. And so that was my sort of transition in,
Yeah, and then you decided to move to New York?
Yeah.
That's another big transition. Right. You've done a lot of things here.
Yeah, I mean, we had a whole bunch of years where my wife, who's American, moved to the UK, and we had a whole immigration battle with that, and it was really a pain in the ass. And then once that resolved, we were like, okay, now that's resolved, let's go. So a few things like in my life and her life sort of came to a close, and we saw this as an opportunity to maybe strike out something new. And, the fact that we were married at that point, Kate's American, so a little opportunity opened up in New York, and I knew someone, a bit of a name drop. I know Keith Richards' son, Marlon, and he knew everyone in New York. And so he was like, oh, you need to meet so-and-so and so-and-so. And that was my in,
That's him. Yeah.
So, yeah, that was how I got to America. And really, I started voiceover like 6 months before going to America, thinking, there is no dead certs in music anywhere, let alone, going to a brand new country and city. So I dipped my toe in the water because I had all the recording equipment and, now I know how to use it. And then really, when I got to New York, I was exploring both at the same time, and I was doing production and voiceover, and very soon voiceover became dominant. As the music industry imploded, voiceover took over. Kind of convenient, yeah.
I totally get it, yeah. So where did the podcasting come into in all of this?
Well, it was sort of, I was sort of early adopter when it comes to listening to podcasts. I was listening to them back in the UK in like, I don't know, when was that? Like 06, 07, whenever it was like really, really early. And I loved the medium. I obviously listens to a ton of music, but sometimes it's nice to not listen to, not do the day job. And so I liked to be able to just literally go in and find exactly what I wanted to listen to from the people that I wanted to hear when was convenient, rather than radio. And so I was an early adopter of consuming that content. And it took a few years while I was in New York. I was so focused on voiceover and music. And as music drifted away and production drifted away, I started sort of leaning more into podcasting, because it is sort of a combination of those two worlds in some respect. It's the production and the spoken word and the storytelling and mixing in music and sound effects and, all that kind of stuff that I love and have always loved doing. So it was sort of an inevitable path that I was going to follow, really, in some ways. And I didn't know if I wanted to do something myself. I didn't really want to make it about me. So I was writing articles for Backstage at the time for Voiceover, and I just said to them, "You guys should have a podcast. Why don't you have a podcast?" And they were
good question.
Yeah, and they were thinking, they were basically like, "Well, we've been talking about it actually for a long time, but we don't really know how to do it." And so, again, it was sort of a perfect timing, really, situation where but you know, there's millions of times where I've gone out for something and it hasn't been the right timing. So, you know,
well, yeah,
you don't hear
I
about
guess.
where those don't go. But that was another one of those like perfect timing moments where they were looking to do something, and I obviously knew them because I was writing for them, and that was really the thing that really launched me into it. And you know, I'm still doing that podcast now with like, I don't know, 300 episodes or something in, and yeah.
Wow. Is there an episode that you're particularly proud of? I mean, it's kind of like asking you about your children, but
Yeah, I mean,
but is there one that really you remember really deeply?
There was one we did a few years ago. This was while COVID was going on, and it was with Nicolas Cage, and he was such a surprising guy. I mean, we all know kind of he's an unusual fellow. You know, his films, you know, run the gamut really, and stylistically, and you know, genre. But he showed up early to get the tech right. He was super chatty.
Wow.
I always gauge like how someone is based on how they work with me, because I'm not the host of that show. And if they're sort of friendly and helpful and wanting to get things right with me, it's usually a good sign that they're, you know, not just there for the glory of being on the show. And he was just like, he stayed after. He was talking about the UK. We were like bonding over places that we'd been, and he was just such a like unexpectedly chilled out guy. Excuse me.
Especially during COVID.
Yeah, I think maybe he was just super bored and he just wanted someone to speak to.
He was just stuck at home. Yeah.
used to getting all this, you know, attention. I thought the same for Nicole Kidman. She was like, she just got off a flight from Australia. You know, you could have given her a lot of excuse for like being a little like rough around the edges, you know, in terms of mood wise. But she was, again, you know, she wasn't super tech savvy, but she worked, you know, I was like, okay, I'm going to walk you through it. We'll just get a couple of little things I want to change. She was like, oh, absolutely. But I don't know what I'm doing. And just really accommodating. And those are the things more than the content so much that I really appreciate is how people behave off air, you know, rather than when they're sort of, they can switch it on. So those two, I say, would really sort of stand out to me. But we've had some amazing guests talk about stuff that, you know, the acting process that I've learned a ton from over the years. Yeah.
I'll bet that's been helpful with the voiceover as well.
Yeah, it really has. It really has.
Yeah. Wow. So where did Bondi Vet come into all of this? I have to ask, because I have like so many people on my end that are like super fans of that particular TV show.
Yeah, I mean, when did I start doing Bondi Vet? That's a good question.
It's been several years. I think,
yes, it's definitely been at least 5.
Yeah.
Because I started doing Vet on the Hill, which is a show in the UK that actually got shown over here too and around the world. People maybe
I have seen a few of those as well. Yeah.
And Bondi Vet is very Australia centric. Vet on the Hill is very UK centric, and so I handle the UK stuff. And then a couple of years ago, the guy who did the Australian was like, I'm running the company. I don't know if I have time for this anymore. And they tried a few people out, and they were like, oh, well, you know, listeners are familiar with you. Can you just do everything? And they're really leaning into digital now. So because, you know, as you know, like they have such a huge following on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and TikTok now as well. And
I'm seeing it on Facebook mostly.
Yeah.
So yeah. But they have a YouTube channel too,
yeah,
right?
it's got like, I don't know, 2 million subscribers on YouTube, and
it's incredible.
they get, I mean, I know the viewing figures. They get way more on social media than they do broadcast these days, like live, linear kind of broadcast.
Yeah.
And that's not, exactly. It's not really the least bit surprising anymore. But yeah, so yeah, I still do a session for them every other week or so, and you know, it's great. It's great. learn about
that is
all
fantastic.
these animals and the weird things that they get, problems they get themselves into.
I love that you're doing both now, though.
Yeah.
It is very unifying. And, we talk about audio branding here. So you've become a part of their audio brand, really, which I think is really very cool.
Yeah, well, they've really combined the Australian and the UK now, and they mix up the stories. And actually, they have someone in America too. So because I think they've realized they have
one in Atlanta.
Atlanta,
didn't they?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now they know they have such global reach. It makes sense for them to represent those different territories. And I guess a British accent, can do that. I mean, literally American, Australian could also, but I think it's more common for people to hear maybe a British person, cross territories, I guess with the BBC and, David Attenborough and people like that, it's more familiar.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, that is a fantastic win for your voiceover career, definitely. I mean, it's very recognizable. So congratulations.
Thank you. I really enjoy the show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great fun. And they're a great team who put it together, so, it's always an absolute blast in the session.
Yeah, I love it. I love watching them.
Yeah.
So. And I have no pets here at all.
Oh, really? Vicarious entertainment.
Yeah. Exactly. This is like all of the joy of knowing a dog or a cat or whatever it is that they're talking about, and none of the responsibility.
We've got some great croc content coming up soon. So, that's, Elvis, the crocodile that likes eating lawnmowers.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay. I will watch for that. Definitely.
They're always popular online.
Wow. Okay. So now I know you're a voice actor. I know you do a lot of audio engineering for yourself as well as podcasts in general, but you've started offering podcast assistance for audio engineering and creating and all of that through your new company. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the genesis of that was and how you went into that?
Yeah, well, as I said at the beginning, really, it's sort of the perfect sweet spot for the things that I love, the production side and the sort of storytelling side. And although I love doing these voiceover gigs, and it's great, I'm not going to say it's not great, my passion really is in putting stuff together and making things from not existing in the first place, if that makes any sense. And I've been doing this production stuff for people for years, like I do. I produce Backstage's podcast, a whole bunch of other people throughout the last 5-7 years. And my wife was basically like, just why don't you just like put it under a banner, create a company that actually, you can put it all together. You can highlight all the different shows that you do and, maybe grow that thing as its own thing. And so she sort of gave me the kick up the arse, and I was kind of dragging my heels like, oh, I don't know. And finally she was, obviously she was absolutely right. And in January, I sort of bit the bullet and did it and formed the company. And it makes so much more sense because it's now me not splitting my brain in a whole bunch of ways and trying to like market and promote myself as a whole bunch of different things. Jamie, the voice actor, and RPS Audio is the production. And I can scale that with bringing people in and growing that company separately. And I'm still able to do the voiceover stuff too. So it really makes a lot of sense to sort of delineate those two things.
I get it.
From, in my brain as much as the marketing and the branding side too. So
sure. Yeah. So who are you working with some people now in your new offering as a podcast producer?
Well,
besides Backstage.
Oh, in terms of clients? Yeah. I've got a whole bunch of, I got a whole bunch of episodes, shows that are on the verge of coming out, actually, which we haven't announced. But there's a show called Good Revenue, which is which is a friend of a friend who introduced me to her. She is honestly, the content is so high end. I'm editing it in such detail, and I'm slowly getting my head around what it is in terms of the business side, but I couldn't give you a good account of exactly what the show's about because I don't really understand the content.
Well, again, I think when shows start, they're kind of finding their ground.
Yeah.
Like I've been doing this
for over 4 years now, so I know pretty well what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
And it takes some time. I think if they've just started and it's like 3 months in or something, then, maybe it takes a little time for them to understand exactly what the point is that they want to get across, more than the audience.
I think she's got such a niche audience. Neetha's got such a niche audience, and they love it. I mean, it's getting such good feedback, and it's really targeted for them. I mean, it would be like me listening to a show all about, advanced synthesis or something like that. Like I would love it, but it wouldn't really appeal to a lot of people.
The more niche you can get, the better.
Yeah, I mean, I say this a lot with podcasting. It depends what you want to get out of it, but sometimes really getting to those crucial 100 people or 200 or 500 people that could really change your business is it's business altering potential, there, because, or maybe you're like Nike and you need to reach 3 million people an episode. That's cool too. Like that's fine. But then you're not going to, talk about something really, really specific, like the rubber that goes into making the shoe. Like you would talk about sports or whatever it is that, they would be interested in. So it's really, depends on the thing, but sometimes, it's just really keying into a particular audience and making that personal connection, because you do feel a personal connection when you listen to a podcast and you get to know the host and you get to know the guests and the show and the feel and the vibe of it. It's a really great way to get to know someone.
Yeah, I think for the host, it's also a really great way to get to know their guest.
Yeah.
So if she's making a show that is putting a guest out towards this very specific audience, then she's making a really good connection with the person she's speaking with. And that helps a business however it could,
Well, she's a consultant, and we literally have an episode coming up shortly, and it was with a very high up, I want to say CMO at a Fortune 500 company. And they are very, very particular about who they'll speak to. And they do a lot of background research on the podcast, make sure there's no, it's legit. They know what they're talking about. There's going to be no gotchas, and, they're not going to misrepresent the guest and all that kind of stuff. And, we have that with Backstage all the time, that there's a lot of sort of due diligence that has to go into it. And, so all the work that you put in to make something of quality can really elevate that. And like you say, you can get to speak to people who you never otherwise would. And when you have something of value to offer them, they are inclined to do a thing rather than just respond to an email. You're giving them an opportunity to tell a story or reach maybe a slightly different crowd, or, just for sort of 45 minutes of their time, they might very well go ahead and do that, because, you're actually offering them something.
Yeah, very true. And good for her for getting this particular guest, because I hope that elevates everything for her. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah. Are there other podcasts that are coming out that you're interested in mentioning?
I've got one I'm not sure I can talk about. It's a person that we both know.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to say the person's name, but she has a podcast that her mother was making, and she was living in a nursing home, and they wanted to create a podcast where a sort of older generation was sort of giving advice to a younger generation, and it's the most adorable podcast you'll ever listen to in your life.
I love it.
And it's just two older ladies talking to each other, and it's gold. It's like a gold mine, this thing. It's so enjoyable for me to edit. It's got a slight tinge of sadness, though, because unfortunately her mother died in the autumn, last autumn. Okay. And so there's a real poignancy to the whole thing. And it's weirdly kind of uplifting as well as a little bit sad. And I don't know, I can't, it's an emotional experience going through this thing.
Well, I mean, I guess she now has this audio record.
Yeah, it's her mum speaking to a friend of hers. I sent the first episode over a few days ago, and she sent me this really sweet voice note. She was like, "Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. Like, it's like having it back in the room again." And, because I did a lot of work trying to like tidy this audio up, because it was, Oh my goodness. Like it was like the microphone was over there. One of the guests was here. Like they were all different GarageBand sessions. And I was trying to figure out, like what's what. So that's a really fun one. I'm working with a company and the CEO, they're a recruitment company and it's called Bring Your Magic. And he wants to talk about, how to get the best out of people and how CEOs can motivate their employees and how people really operate at a really high level. And that's going to be coming out soon as well. And I'm missing a couple, but there's a couple unfortunately I can't talk about because they haven't even been announced yet. But
I totally understand.
Yeah, we're really running the gamut right now. And obviously I have my own podcast that I've
of course.
naturally, try and keep afloat. But yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I love listening to the banter between you and Karen. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've been so busy lately. We haven't been able to put any out. But yeah, this is a podcast that me and a friend put out, and we just talk about voiceover, and we don't do any planning whatsoever. It's the only way we can make it happen.
If you want to mention the name of it, you totally can.
Yeah, it's called the VO Breakfast Show. And we haven't got episodes out right now because we're in the middle of sort of planning phase for our conference, which is coming up, in a couple of weeks' time. And then we got a virtual conference coming up in September. So we, any time we're chatting, it's work.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.